Welcome to Dark Hours. Tonight, I've gathered 5 terrifying true-feeling stories, each one about the dread of being home alone at night. These aren't monsters from faraway places. These are the kinds of things that could happen in an ordinary house, on an ordinary street, when you least expect it. So before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a night of horror with us. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time of night is it right now? I always find it chilling to see people listening from across the world, some at midnight, some at 3 in the morning. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and let's begin. I was 23 when this happened, and to this day the memory is sharp enough to make me check outside every time I hear the faint click of our motion sensor light. It was winter, late January, one of those nights when the air feels heavy with snow. My parents had taken a trip to visit family in another state, which meant I had the entire house to myself. You'd think at that age I'd be thrilled, freedom, peace, no one asking questions about where I was going or when I'd be home. And at first I was. The house was a 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood, not far from the edge of town. Nothing special, just the kind of home where the driveway stretched long and straight and the back porch opened up into a yard that melted into trees. The kind of place that felt secure in the daylight. At night, though, especially in the dead of winter, it had a different weight. The shadows pooled thicker, the silence pressed harder, and you started to notice every creak and hum you normally ignored. That night, I set myself up for comfort. I made a mug of hot cocoa, microwaved leftover pizza, and queued up a movie I'd already seen too many times. Something about familiar dialogue makes being alone feel less lonely. I sprawled on the couch, blanket tucked around me, the hum of the heater steady in the background. Outside, the storm gathered slowly, flakes dancing in the glow of the streetlights. For the first few hours, it was perfect. I felt like I'd finally gotten the break I needed. No noise, no responsibilities, just me and the storm outside. Around midnight, though, things shifted. The motion sensor light in the driveway snapped on. At first, it was just a quick flicker. The window blinds lit up from behind, throwing faint bars of light across the living room. My eyes slid automatically toward the kitchen window, the one with a view of the driveway. I pushed the curtain aside. The snow reflected harsh under the lamp, but the driveway itself was empty. Just the white stretch of concrete leading out to the street. No footprints, no movement, just snowflakes falling in that lazy, muffled way. I told myself it was nothing, a branch swaying in the wind, a rabbit darting across. The sensors were old, finicky. I let the curtain drop and settled back into the couch, but the calm didn't stick. Over the next hour, the house seemed louder. Every groan of the heater expanding in the vents, every tick of the pipes, every faint shifting noise in the wood, it all sounded amplified. It was the kind of silence that doesn't relax you, but winds you tighter because you know you're listening too hard. I was half asleep when the light came on again. This time it wasn't a flicker. The whole driveway blazed white. My chest tightened, and I forced myself up, crossing the cold tile floor barefoot to the kitchen window. I lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. Someone was standing at the end of the driveway. I froze. The figure was tall, hunched slightly forward, facing the house. They were too far for me to see clearly. The snow and distance blurred everything, but I knew they were watching. They didn't move, didn't wave or knock. Just stood there in the storm, a silhouette etched in light. My first thought was ridiculous, a neighbor, maybe someone checking in, but it was after 1 in the morning, in the middle of a snowstorm. Who just stands there? I stayed there, gripping the fabric of the curtain, staring back. 1 minute passed, then another. The figure never shifted. My skin prickled with a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. I let the curtain fall, backed away slowly, like if I pretended I hadn't seen them, they'd vanish. For a while I convinced myself that was exactly what happened. When I dared to peek again, the driveway was empty, no one there. But sleep didn't come easy after that. I left the TV on, volume low, as if background noise could protect me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette still standing there. Sometime after 2, I must have drifted into a shallow doze. That's when I heard it. Crunch. Faint but clear. The sound of boots pressing into snow. I jolted upright, heart pounding. At first I thought it was just part of a dream, but then it came again. Crunch. Crunch. Closer this time. I held my breath, ears straining so hard they rang. The sound moved along the side of the house, deliberate, heavy, circling. Then silence. I didn't move. Not a twitch. I lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, every muscle rigid. Eventually, exhaustion won. My body shut down even while my mind screamed to stay awake. When I woke again, the room was pale with pre-dawn light. My head felt stuffed with cotton, but something pulled me toward the window. I dragged myself across the floor, heart hammering before I even lifted the curtain. The driveway was glowing again, the motion light still on, but the driveway wasn't empty. Footprints dotted the snow, not just a few, dozens. They led from the street straight up the driveway, curving around the side of the house. They pressed deep, crisp outlines of boots. Too big to be mine, too heavy. I stumbled toward the back door. Through the sliding glass, more prints. They circled the house completely. At each window, the snow was disturbed where someone had stood, pressed close. By the kitchen door, by the bathroom window, even under my own bedroom window upstairs. And near the basement window, the one low to the ground, the snow was flattened into a wide impression, like someone had crouched there for hours, watching. My hands shook as I locked every latch, double-checked every deadbolt. I paced the house until the sun was high, waiting for the sound of footsteps to return. They never did. By mid-morning, the storm had covered some of the tracks, but the ones near the windows lingered, sharp enough to prove I hadn't imagined it. Nothing was stolen, no locks were broken, whoever it was hadn't tried to come inside. They just wanted me to know they'd been there. I never told my parents. What would I say? That someone spent the night circling the house, leaving footprints as proof? That I lay awake knowing they were standing beneath my window? Even now, years later, I check the motion light every single night, and every time it flicks on, I hold my breath, bracing for the sight of a figure at the end of the driveway, waiting in the snow. I was 21 when I agreed to house sit for my aunt, and if I had known what those nights would be like, I never would have said yes. She lived in one of those big old houses you see on the edge of small towns, built decades before I was born, maybe even before she was, with long wooden hallways, tall windows that rattled in the wind, and a roof that sloped into an attic no one ever seemed to use. My aunt swore she hadn't been up there in years. She said it was just insulation and dust. At first, I thought house-sitting sounded easy. Feed the cat, water the plants, bring in the mail. She'd be gone for a week visiting her friend in Florida. The place was quiet, and I figured it would be a chance to study without distractions. But the first thing you notice in a house like that isn't the quiet, it's the way it breathes. Wood shifts, pipes groan, floors creak even when you're not walking on them. The first night I lay in bed, every sound seemed sharper. A faint whine of wind through the chimney, the tick of a radiator cooling down. The way the boards in the hallway expanded and popped as the temperature dropped. None of it should have been unusual, but the silence in between those sounds made them feel heavier. It was around 11 when I heard the first noise from above. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug after making tea when I froze. A sound drifted down from the ceiling. Not a creak, not a crack, but something slower. A deliberate shift of weight. Step. Then silence. At first I laughed at myself. It was an old house. Things creaked, but then it came again. Step. Pause. Step. I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling. Right above me, the boards shifted as if someone was walking across them. The pattern wasn't random. It was paced. Rhythmic. My hands were wet from the sink, but I didn't move. I just stood there listening, my heart thumping in my ears. The cat, a fat gray tabby, perked up from her spot on the counter and stared upward too. Her ears flicked, eyes narrowing. That's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. There was no way into the attic from inside the kitchen. The only access was a small square hatch in the upstairs hallway ceiling. A hatch with no ladder, no stairs. Just a panel you'd have to push open if you could even reach it. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was wind shifting the boards or something with the pipes. I shut off the sink, turned out the light, and went back upstairs. But the sound didn't stop. That night, as I tried to sleep in the guest bedroom, the pattern returned. Slow steps across the ceiling, pacing above my bed. I lay frozen, staring at the dark. The cat curled against my legs. Every time I thought it would stop, another faint thud echoed from above. Step. Pause. Step. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke the next morning, the silence felt heavy, the kind that doesn't comfort you, but hangs in the air like a warning. For the first couple of days, I convinced myself it was normal. Old houses made sounds. My aunt never mentioned it because maybe she was just used to it. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat in the upstairs hallway with the cat on my lap, a flashlight in hand, staring up at the attic hatch. Dust lined the edges, faint gray ridges against the white ceiling. I'd never paid attention to it before, but now it looked wrong. Like the panel had been shifted recently. Tiny scuff marks marred the paint, little arcs where it had scraped against the frame. The sound started again around midnight. This time it wasn't just random pacing. The steps moved in a straight line, slow and heavy, crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I pointed it upward, half expecting the panel to slide open and something to peer down. It didn't, but I swear I saw a dusting of particles drift from the edges, as if the hatch had shifted just slightly. The cat growled low in her throat, a sound I'd never heard from her before. She stared unblinking at the ceiling, ears flat. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in bed, the flashlight clutched against my chest, listening as the footsteps moved above me. Sometimes they stopped right over my head, like whoever was up there was listening too. The next morning I called my aunt. I tried to sound casual. "Hey, quick question. Does anyone ever go in your attic?" She laughed softly on the other end. "God, no. It's just insulation and junk." "Why?" I lied. I told her I thought I heard squirrels or raccoons. She sighed, said it was possible, and told me to call pest control if it got bad. But I didn't believe it was animals. I'd grown up in houses with raccoons in the walls, squirrels in the roof. They scratched, scurried, scrambled. They didn't walk in steady, measured steps. That night I pushed a chair under the hatch, climbed up. My hands trembled as I pressed against the panel. It didn't budge at first. Then, with a groan, it lifted an inch, spilling a cloud of dust down onto my face. I coughed, shining the flashlight into the darkness above. All I saw was beams, insulation, and shadow. The air smelled dry, stale, like paper and wood rot. Nothing moved. I let the hatch drop, dust still in my hair, and climbed down. But the scuff marks were real. Something had pushed that panel open before. The following nights blurred together. I hardly slept. The footsteps returned every time the house grew quiet, moving back and forth above me, stopping when I stood under the hatch. Sometimes I thought I heard something else too, like faint breathing through the ceiling. On the sixth night, it changed. I was lying in bed when the sound started again. Step, pause, step. But instead of crossing, it stopped directly above me. The ceiling groaned. Dust sifted down. Then the hatch rattled. I shot upright, flashlight trembling in my grip. The panel shook once, twice, as if something was testing it. More dust fell, speckling the floor. My chest tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The panel shifted, lifting just enough to see the edge. My flashlight beam caught it, just the smallest gap, black as pitch, and then the unmistakable sound of something descending. A scrape, a creak. I didn't wait. I bolted from the bed, cat clutched in my arms, and sprinted down the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door barefoot into the freezing night. My breath clouded in the air, my legs numb against the snow. I stood in the yard shaking, staring up at the dark house. Nothing followed, but the light in the hallway flickered once, as if something had moved inside. When my aunt returned days later, I tried to tell her. She brushed it off with a laugh, said old houses play tricks. But when I begged her to check the attic with me, she finally relented. We pulled the hatch open together, shining a bright lantern into the space above. The dust was thick, the beams sagged, but near the far corner I saw it, a trail of disturbed powder, footprints, faint but undeniable, leading from the hatch across the attic floor. They stopped at the wall. No exit, no ladder, no reason for them to be there. My aunt paled. She didn't laugh then. She shut the hatch quickly, locked it, and told me to forget what I saw. But I couldn't, because those prints weren't just random marks. They were shaped like bare feet, long toes spread wide, pressed deep into dust that no one should have disturbed in decades. And sometimes when I try to sleep in my own house now, I swear I hear it again. Step, pause, step, above me, waiting. I used to think the scariest thing about being home alone was the silence. Now I know it's the sound you expect to mean one thing, suddenly meaning something else. It was a Friday in early spring, not cold enough to run the heat all night, but not warm enough to leave the windows open. I had the house to myself. My roommate, Evan, had driven upstate for a family thing and wouldn't be back until Sunday. It's a small place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, low fence, narrow yard. A decent starter rental on a quiet street where every driveway has a basketball hoop and every trash can sits in the same neat line on Wednesdays. I always said there's safety in neighborhoods like ours. Lights on timers, dogs that bark when a leaf drops, people who wave. I was halfway through a cheap frozen pizza and a documentary I'd already seen twice when I heard the knock. Just one, a single, flat knock at the front door. I muted the TV and waited, expecting the follow-up. Normal people knock more than once. Neighbors call out a hello. Packages come with a bell ring. The silence stretched. I got up, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and padded to the entryway. We have one of those peepholes that makes everyone look like they're standing in a fishbowl. The porch light was on its automatic timer, a cone of yellow cutting through the dark. The door window is frosted glass. Blurry shapes, no detail. I didn't see anyone. I held my breath for a few seconds and listened through the wood. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and that low neighborhood hush you only notice when you turn everything else off. I opened my mouth to call out, then stopped. It was close to 10. If someone needed something, they'd knock again. Or they'd text first. Everyone texts first now. After a minute, I wrote it off. Maybe it was the house settling and I'd imagined the shape of a knock around the noise. Old wood does that. Turns innocent sounds into questions. I went back to the couch, unmuted the documentary, and stuffed another slice in my mouth I didn't really want. 9 minutes later, because I checked the time when it happened again, the knock came a second time. Knock. I paused the TV, not the front door this time. It came from the side door off the kitchen, the one that opens onto the driveway. That door is solid wood with no window, no peephole. The porch light over it is motion sensor and only sort of works. Sometimes a moth sets it off like a stadium floodlight. Sometimes a person can walk right under it and it stays dark. I stood up, not sure what I planned to do, then sat back down. I've seen enough videos about scams and break-ins to know you don't go flinging doors open at night. I waited. No second knock. No voice. Okay, I thought. Neighbor? Wrong door? I grabbed my phone to check for a text. Nothing. I went to the kitchen light switch and flicked it on. Bright white filled the room, and for a second I felt better just because I could see everything. The side door looked ordinary. The deadbolt was turned. The chain hung down. The doormat was cockeyed from when I'd tracked in groceries earlier. I stood there, listening to the nothing, palms open on the counter like that made me ready for something. I told myself if it was a neighbor, they'd go around to the front, where there's a bell. I gave it a few minutes, waited for the doorbell. Nothing. I turned the kitchen light off and tried to slide back into the movie like it still mattered. I didn't make it 10 minutes. Knock. The sound came from the sliding glass door in the back, just one knuckle tap on glass. Not loud. Almost polite. My chest went tight in a way I can't describe except to say that it felt like I was supposed to have an explanation ready and I didn't. The backyard is small and fenced, with a floodlight that turns the whole space into a glare when it's on. I didn't flip it. Something about plunging the yard into daylight while I stood in the dark felt like an invitation. Instead, I stood up carefully and took 2 steps toward the slider, keeping my weight on the parts of the floor I knew wouldn't creak. The vertical blinds were closed. I put 2 fingers through them and widened a slit just enough to peer out. The yard stared back in black-on-black layers. The neighbor's motion light was off. The space behind our shed was a deeper dark. The floodlight housing had a dead bug lodged under the lens. I could see it because I'd been the one to clean the thing last month when Evan kept swearing the shadow was a rat. No one was there. I let the blinds fall back into place, put my hands on my hips like that would help, and listened. If it was kids messing around, wouldn't I hear feet on the grass? A giggle? A whisper? If it was someone trying to get me to open the door, wouldn't they try more than once? I waited a full 5 minutes before I moved. Then I went to the front, relocked the deadbolt I'd already checked, and stood with my ear pressed to the wood until my neck hurt. It's weird how loud your own heartbeat gets when you try to listen past it. After a while, normal life tried to muscle back in. The pizza got cold, the documentary flickered through scenes I couldn't track. I texted Evan, "You ever get random knocks at night here?" He didn't answer. Bad service where he was, I remembered. I set the phone down and told myself I was being dramatic. Knock. I flinched hard enough to bang my knee on the coffee table. This time it was the front door again, single knock. A patient one, like someone with all the time in the world who didn't need to rush the conversation. I looked at the peephole and didn't move toward it. I thought about the chain on the side door and the way the vertical blinds at the back had swung slightly when I'd let them go. I thought about how quiet our street is, how the houses sit just far enough apart to make calling for a neighbor feel like waking the entire block. The knock didn't come again. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the aluminum flashlight we keep there for power outages. It has a tight, mean beam and feels heavy enough to matter if you had to hold it like more than a flashlight. I clicked it once. The sound, louder than it needed to be, and the cone of white shot across the living room. It made the safe places look theatrical and the shadowed places look deeper. I was halfway to the door when a second sound came from somewhere else in the house, the softest brush along the sliding glass like someone had drawn a fingertip across it. I stopped so fast my socks skidded. The sound came again from the back, not a knock, a testing, a hello that isn't hello. I backed up until my calves hit the couch. Then I did what I should have done 30 minutes earlier and dialed 911. I gave the operator my address and told her I was home alone and someone was knocking on all my doors one at a time. Saying it out loud made me feel silly and terrified in equal parts. She asked me to stay on the line and not to open anything or turn on any exterior lights. If it's someone trying doors, she said, light can tell them exactly where you are. That sentence changed how I felt about every switch in the house. She asked if I had any cameras. I told her no, we'd talked about it but never got around to it. She said a patrol car was on the way and asked me to describe the knocks again. I did, feeling more ridiculous by the second, like I was reporting a ghost with good manners. While we were still talking, there was another sound. It was so quiet I wasn't sure if I heard it through the phone or through the air. A single tap at the kitchen window over the sink. Not a knuckle this time. A metal click, like the edge of a ring or a key against glass. I said, "That's the kitchen." The operator asked if the window had a lock. I said yes. She told me to stay where I was. 2 minutes dragged out to 10. The operator kept her voice level and calm. She asked about my layout. I told her, front door faces the street, side door to the driveway, slider to the yard. She asked if I had a back gate. I said yes, but the latch sticks. She asked if anyone else had a key. Only Evan and me. She asked if there was a dog. I said no, and wished there was. Then nothing. The kind of nothing that makes you doubt your own certainty. I started to feel stupid again. Maybe I should have checked. Maybe it was a neighbor, or a kid, or somebody confused about the house number. The operator asked me to stay on until the officers arrived. I nodded and realized she couldn't see me nod. That's when the knock came again. Knock. Not the front, not the side, not the slider. This one was at the bathroom window, a tiny square on the side of the house that looks out on the narrow strip between our place and the neighbor's fence. It sounded wrong because it was a knock where knocks don't go. No one taps a bathroom window like it's a door. I whispered, "Bathroom." The operator said, "Officers are pulling onto your street now." I felt my shoulders drop an inch. I didn't realize until that moment how tight I'd drawn them up around my ears. A second later, the doorbell rang. It was the most normal sound I'd heard all night, and I still nearly jumped out of my skin. The operator asked if I could see the patrol car. I edged to the peephole. Red and blue washed the street. I opened the door 2 inches with the chain on and told the officers through the gap what had been happening. They came inside, asked me to wait in the living room, and started a slow walk around the house. Their footsteps were a relief until they weren't. I heard one of them stop in the kitchen, the other went down the hall. They spoke low and professional, then one called my name like he didn't want to startle me. "Sir? Did you smear anything on the glass back here?" I went to the kitchen and stood far enough away from the sliding door that I could see without being a silhouette. He angled his flashlight and showed me what I hadn't wanted to see. On the outside of the glass, just above the lock, there was a smudge of breath, a fogged oval you could only get if you put your face against the door and exhaled. In that fog, a finger had traced a short vertical line. Not a letter, not a symbol I recognized, just a line, maybe where someone dragged a fingernail through the condensation. The second officer stepped in from the hall. "Side window too," she said, "over the sink." We went room by room. The front door was clean. The side door had 2 faint knuckle marks, like someone had knocked with just the first joint of a finger. The bathroom window had a smear low on the glass, as if a forehead had pressed there and slid a little. The floodlight had never triggered. They checked the yard and the side path with their beams, and after a minute, with one of those narrow, intense lights that make everything look like a forensic show. The fence wasn't tall. If you were determined, you could hop it without leaving much of a trace. The dirt under the bathroom window had a disturbance, like someone had leaned against the wall. Not a clear print, just ground that had been hard earlier, now scuffed into soft lines. They asked if there had been any arguments with anyone lately, any deliveries gone wrong, any new friends or ex-friends. I told them no. They told me it was good I'd called, that sometimes people knock in different places to get you to open one. That patience is a tactic. That word stuck with me. Patience. I suddenly understood the single knocks. They offered to circle the block a few times. They suggested I leave the porch light on but keep interior lights low in rooms with exterior windows, at least for the night. They asked if I wanted them to call someone for me. I said no, even though what I meant was I didn't know who to call that late who wouldn't answer with worry in their voice. After they left, the house felt different, not safer, not exactly more dangerous, just clarified, like someone had written a definition on the wall I couldn't pretend I hadn't read. I rechecked the back lock even though the officer had watched me do it. I closed the bathroom door as if that added steel to the window. I pulled the living room curtains tight and wedged the flashlight under the arm of the couch. I didn't try to sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the couch, legs angled toward the hallway, phone face up on the coffee table like it could jump into my hand faster that way. Minutes passed like hard candy in your mouth, slow to dissolve, too sweet to forget. I told myself nothing would happen again. Whoever it was had seen the patrol car and melted into the easy dark between houses. Gone to try a different street, a different door, a different person who'd open because they were kinder or braver or more tired of feeling silly. Around 1:30, the house finally started to feel like it belonged to me again. I stood, stretched, and told myself I'd at least brush my teeth. The bathroom door was still closed. I opened it and flipped the light on with the back of my hand like that mattered. There was a sound from the side of the house. Not a knock. The softest rub, like skin against stucco. I froze with my hand still on the switch. The mirror showed me a face I didn't like. Too bright around the eyes. Mouth pulled tight. I turned the light off and stood perfectly still. The sound didn't come again. I waited another 30 seconds, then stepped backward into the hall and closed the door like that was a way to end a conversation. I didn't go back to the couch. I sat on the floor in the hallway this time, where I could see the front door and hear the kitchen and gauge the slider by the slice of dark at its bottom edge. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for my back to ache and my calves to throb and my phone battery to dip under 50 from doing nothing but being ready. At 2:17, according to the lock screen I kept flicking awake, there was one last knock. Knock. It came from the garage door to the house, a door no one outside can see from the street. A door behind a closed garage I hadn't opened all night. The sound was so precise and so quiet that I wouldn't have heard it from the living room. I only heard it because I was sitting there holding the house like you hold your breath. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. I thought of the officers telling me patience is a tactic and understood with sudden clarity that it wasn't about doors at all. It was about mapping, about locating every point a person could be tempted to open, to investigate, to reset the sense that the world is reasonable and polite. The knock didn't come again. I called the non-emergency number the officers had given me and told them about the garage door. They said they'd send the car by once more and suggested I do something simple and boring, turn the TV back on low, and don't move from where I felt safest. People like that prefer houses that answer them, the dispatcher said. Don't answer. I let the documentary run, not hearing a single word of it. I scrolled through nonsense on my phone. I watched the dark change shades around the edges of the blinds. I waited. Nothing else happened. When morning finally came and the neighborhood unspooled into routine, cars starting, dogs complaining, a kid on a scooter clacking over a crack, I walked the perimeter in daylight like that would ask a second opinion from the world. On the sliding door, the breath had dried to a faint blur and the line scrawled through it had gone ghost pale. On the kitchen window, there was a half print so smudged I couldn't tell if it was a thumb or a fist. At the bathroom window where the narrow strip of dirt meets the concrete footing, there was a spot the size of a knee where the ground had been pressed down hard. You wouldn't see it if you weren't looking. But I was. Evan came home Sunday and laughed the kind of laugh people do when they want to be sympathetic but are secretly relieved it didn't happen to them. We put a dowel in the slider track that afternoon. We ordered a small camera for the porch and another for the yard and said we should have done it months ago, and that became our new way of saying we'd learned something too late but not too late to do anything about it. I still listen for knocks. That's the part I didn't expect. The way a sound you've heard your whole life can split into different meanings. A neighbor at noon is one kind of noise. A single patient knock at midnight, then again from a different direction, then again where there shouldn't be a knock at all. That's something else. I wish the story ended with a clear face or a plate number or someone in handcuffs. It doesn't. It ends with a row of small changes. A dowel, a camera, a porch light we leave on later than we used to, a habit of pausing in the hallway at night with my phone already in my hand. And sometimes, when the house is entirely quiet and the documentary runs long enough that it forgets I'm watching, I swear I can hear it again somewhere far down the block, moving from door to door, a single knock every few minutes. Patient as weather. It's probably nothing, probably someone confusing an address, or a kid told to go home, or a salesman ignoring the signs. That's what I tell people when they ask why our porch light is always on. But when the house is dark and the neighborhood goes still and the refrigerator hum is the only thing trying to pretend the night is normal, I remember the knock at the bathroom window most of all. Because it wasn't asking to come in, it was asking if I would answer. I didn't think a parked car could scare me. Headlights, sure. Engines, sure. People, obviously. But a car just sitting there? That used to mean a delivery, a rideshare, a neighbor idling while they texted. I had 100 normal explanations ready, until the night none of them fit. It was a Thursday sliding into Friday, one of those weeks that had been loud for no good reason. End of quarter emails, 2 back-to-back meetings that should have been memos, neighbors pressure washing their driveway at the exact worst time. By the time 10 o'clock rolled around, the quiet felt earned. I turned my phone over on the coffee table face down, told myself I wouldn't check it again, and let a boring nature documentary do the thinking for me. Sometime after midnight, I dozed off and woke up to that odd internal alarm your body sets when the house changes temperature. The heater had clicked off. The silence was almost too complete. Then the room filled with light. 2 long white beams sliding across the ceiling like someone had dragged daylight in with a knife. Headlights. They swept from left to right and stopped. I didn't move. I lay there on the couch with the blanket bunched at my chest, waiting for the next part. The reverse lights, the engine shifting, the neighbor pulling a 3-point turn at the end of our skinny street. That's what people do at night when they realize they've taken a wrong turn. They keep moving. The engine stayed. It wasn't loud, not a truck or muscle car, just the low, even idle of a compact something that had been maintained well enough to purr without rattling. I could feel it more than hear it, the soft hum you notice in your ribs before your ears catch up. I sat up, every motion careful, like my furniture might creak at the wrong time and give me away. The front curtains were closed, the kind that never fall quite right, always leaving a hairline gap where light can prove it knows the way in. I stood to the side of that gap and leaned in until one eye could see out. A car was in my driveway, halfway up, nose almost to the garage, right where I park when I bring in groceries and don't feel like making a second trip. Small sedan, maybe gray, maybe dark blue. The color was swallowed by the night and the glare it cast on the siding. The headlights were on, bright enough to make the license plate unreadable from where I was. The engine idled. The driver's door stayed shut. I told myself I was being dramatic. People turn around in driveways all the time. Maybe the driver had a GPS that said, "You have arrived," and they believed it. Maybe they were texting someone, "here," and didn't realize they weren't. I waited for the reverse lights. None. After a minute that lasted 5, I set my hands on the curtain and almost opened it wide like the idiot in a horror movie who wants to be seen. I stopped myself. Instead, I took one step backward, then another, until I could breathe without counting the beats. There are a few rules you learn without anyone teaching you. Don't fling the door open when you don't have to. Don't announce where in the house you are. Don't become a shadow in a lit window. I went for the hallway instead, turned the dimmer switch down to barely there, and let my eyes adjust. From the side window by the stairs, I could see the driver's side at an angle. The glass was up. The shape in the seat looked like a person, a head where a head should be, shoulders hunched forward slightly like they were reading. No phone glow, no wrist movement. No face I could swear to, just a posture. The engine hummed on. I thought about calling a neighbor and pictured them answering half asleep and telling me to call the police if I was worried. I thought about calling the police and pictured them pulling onto my quiet streetlights flashing, and I could already feel the embarrassment in my throat when it turned out to be someone who'd made a dumb mistake and fallen asleep in the wrong driveway. Instead, I did the stupid human thing. I waited for the situation to turn into a different situation. It didn't. The clock on the oven ticked to 1:43. The engine changed pitch once like the driver tapped the gas. The headlights brightened and dipped as if whoever was inside had shifted in their seat. The thought that landed hard and refused to move was this: they weren't idling to leave. They were idling to be there. I texted my friend Tessa because she's the one person who will reply at any hour with a useful sentence. Random question. Someone's just sitting in my driveway with headlights on. What do I do that isn't walk out there and die? She replied in 20 seconds. Lights off inside. Call non-emergency or 911 depending on your gut. Film from a window if you can. Don't engage. Then, do you have motion lights? The front porch did. The side didn't. The garage light was on a pull chain and a ladder. Pointless. I pictured stepping onto the porch and flooding both of us with light. Number. I went to the kitchen for my phone charger, like that was going to fix the part of me that had gone hollow. As the cable clicked in, the headlights snapped off. For 1 second, it was a relief. The world went dim again, and I could pretend the car was leaving. Then my eyes reset, and the silhouette in the driveway turned from glare to shape. The engine kept idling. The cabin was dark. The figure in the driver's seat never moved. A bad idea is still an idea. I told myself I'd get the plate. There's a narrow slice of vision out the side window by the stairs where the front bumper aligned with the street light down the block. If the plate caught that light just right, I might get something. I killed the hallway dimmer, waited for black to settle, then edged back to the glass and angled my head until I could see. The plate was there, but someone had taped a rectangle of dull plastic over it, a cover I've seen on cars that don't want cameras to catch their numbers when headlights hit. At night, with no direct light, it showed matte and useless. I stared anyway. Sometimes the brain grabs at hope like a cat pawing a laser. Nothing. The engine cut. The absence of sound was louder than the sound had been. It rang. It made my ears feel like they'd been holding their breath, too. The figure sat in the dark car in my driveway with the engine off at 1:51 in the morning and didn't move. That was when I called. The dispatcher's voice was flat in the good way, the way that irons the panic out of your tone because you feel silly being the only one with your heart in your mouth. I gave my address and explained carefully that a car had been in my driveway idling for... I checked the microwave clock. 20 minutes, now engine off. I told her I didn't recognize the car. I told her I hadn't turned on lights or gone outside. She asked if I could see the person. I said yes and no. The shape, not the face. She asked if anyone else was in the house. Number. If I had pets. Number. If any doors or windows were open. Number. If the garage was closed. Yes. Officers are on the way, she said. Stay inside. If anything changes, tell me first. I thanked her and immediately hated that I sounded like I was apologizing for bothering her. The car door opened. I didn't say a word. The dispatcher said, "What changed?" And I swallowed hard and said, "Driver's side door." The dome light popped on and haloed the inside for a second. If the driver had looked up toward the house, I'd have seen their face. They didn't. They leaned forward, out of the car, as if they were reaching for something on the driveway, something they had dropped, or left, or knew was there. Then the dome light went dark because the door clicked shut again without the thud of a slam. "Is the person still in the car?" the dispatcher asked. I tried to see. The silhouette in the seat had shifted. The engine stayed off. The headlights stayed off. I said, I think so. The dispatcher told me the officers were turning onto my street any minute. "Do not go outside," she said again. "You're doing the right thing." I nodded, useless to her, useful to me. Red and blue light slid across the far wall like hope showing up late to its own appointment. I heard tires roll slow. I heard the radio squawk I've only ever heard in grocery store parking lots and TV. The patrol car stopped in front of my house. I didn't move toward the door. The dispatcher told me I could hang up if I wanted. I stayed on. You don't lower a rope and then yank it back up. A knock sounded at the front, firm, human, official. Police. I opened the door with the chain on and saw one officer on the porch, another already peeling off toward the driveway with a flashlight held low. The dispatcher told me she'd let me go. I thanked her again, a little less sorry this time, and hung up. "Sir, can you step back for me?" the officer at the door said, and I did, and he slipped inside while the other swept his beam over the car. The car was empty. "Stay here," the officer said quietly and set a hand up like a hinge to keep me from moving forward. They cleared the driveway. They cleared the path between the house and the fence. They cleared the width of the garage door and the shadow behind the trash bins. The one in the yard checked the gate latch, which stuck like it always had, and the top slat on the fence where a sneaker could find purchase. Then the officer by the car crouched and angled his light down. "Footprints," he called. "From driver's side to side yard, also to the back door." My stomach climbed into my throat like it didn't want to be counted among my organs anymore. "Did you see anyone leave the car?" the officer inside asked. I shook my head and realized he deserved a full sentence. "No, the door opened once and shut. I never saw them get out." He nodded like that was a normal thing to hear at 2 a.m. The officer outside traced the prints with the beam like a teacher guiding reluctant eyes along a line of text. The driveway was old concrete. The prints didn't show there, but at the seam, where the path met the thin band of winter soft soil along the house, you could see the shape of something heavier than deer and lighter than a man running. The tread was shallow and smudged, flat-soled, not boots. The stride was unhurried. At the kitchen steps, the dirt turned into 2 dark ovals and a stipple mark on the threshold, like someone had placed hands there and leaned in to look through the gap where the weather stripping never quite seals. We walked the perimeter together. They asked about cameras. I said no. They asked about the car. The officer read the plate into his mic and the answer came back too fast to be interesting. Registered, insured, not stolen. The name meant nothing to me. A city 2 towns over. No warrants. No reports. Just a person with a car in my driveway for reasons that weren't illegal to have. "Could be a DUI who stopped to sleep it off," the officer said. "Could be someone confused. Could be someone who thought this address belonged to someone else." "Could be," I said, and my voice sounded thin enough to pass for polite. "Do you want us to knock on doors?" he asked. "Neighbors sometimes have cameras that catch the approach." I looked at my nearest neighbor's house. Dark, orderly, a rectangle of a place that never seemed to have dishes in the sink or toys on the lawn. Waking them at 2 a.m. felt like a small crime of its own. "Maybe in the morning," I said. "Okay," he said. "We can leave a note for them to call." They checked the car again. It was locked now, which is strange when you think about it. If the driver had left in a hurry, would they remember to lock? If they were coming back, would they lock at all? The plastic plate cover glowed dull when the beam hit. "Do you want it towed for trespass?" he asked. "It's your driveway." The thought of the car staying was worse than the thought of a tow truck grinding its way into the night. "Yes," I said, and I hated how relieved the word made me feel. The tow took 20 minutes that felt like a movie with too many establishing shots. The truck reversed with a series of beeps that sounded rude to the hour. The driver ratcheted the car up with the gentle efficiency of someone who had done this enough times to forget what a lifted vehicle looks like to someone who thinks meaning resides in objects. When the car's rear wheels left the concrete, something slid from under the bumper and tapped the driveway. The tow driver bent and picked it up, a folded map, paper soft along the creases, the kind you get at a visitor center in a small town that wants you to see 3 streets and a lake. He looked to the officer, who looked to me. I shook my head. Not mine. They bagged it like a TV show. The patrol car rolled off. The tow truck taillights shrank to 2 red dots and then nothing. My street clicked back into silence, the kind without a hum in it. The officer at the door nodded like we'd finished a conversation that had lasted longer than either of us expected. "Call back if anyone returns," he said. "Keep your lights the way you had them. You did the right thing." I stood in the entryway for a full minute after he left, door shut, chain still hanging like a question. I wanted to do something that felt like regaining control. I locked the bedroom window I never open. I put the aluminum flashlight on the hall table where my hand would find it without thinking. I texted Tessa tow truck took it. Footprints to back door. "We'll call you in the morning," and didn't add, "I'm still standing here like the floor might collapse if I move." Sleep didn't come exactly. Something like sleep did, a shiver that passed for rest. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the dome light pop and the driver lean out like they were retrieving a thought they'd forgotten they left in my driveway. Morning clarified nothing. Mud prints dried to the color of dry coffee along the base of the steps. A fingertip smear showed on the kitchen glass if you looked at a slant. I knocked on my neighbor's door at 10. He blinked, yawned, and said he'd check his door cam. The footage he texted later showed the car slow at the corner and turn in like it belonged here. The driver sat for 6 minutes before my cameraless house could offer any more narrative. The part where the door opened wasn't in frame. The part where footprints began belonged to me. The map in the bag turned out to be from a county park none of us had heard of, miles away, a loop around a lake with a campground closed for winter. No marks on it, no route traced. It felt like meaning but held none we could find. The registered owner of the car didn't answer their phone. The tow yard said someone called Saturday asking about fees and hours and said they'd come Monday. Monday they didn't. Tuesday they did, with cash counted out in tight, clean bills, and the tow clerk wrote down, male, mid-30s, quiet, because the form told him to write something. No crime, the officer told me on the follow-up call. No charges. Trespass is a civil matter. If it happens again, call sooner. Keep doors locked. Consider a camera. I did. A cheap one for the porch, another for the driveway, a third for the backyard because the idea of not knowing was a bigger expense than the hardware. The first night with them on, I watched the empty street like a security guard for a museum with nothing in it. The cameras recorded the facts of nothing happening with perfect clarity. Weeks later, when the part of my brain that expects patterns had finally stopped leaning forward in its chair, I came home late from work and swung into the driveway too fast. The porch light caught the house at a different angle. The cameras ticked a note on their little cloud logs, and I thought about the car again, and the dome light, and the way the driver didn't look at the house. I think that's the part that won't let go. Not the plate cover, or the prints, or the map. It's that they didn't glance up at the window the way a person does when they know a person is in the house. It was like I wasn't even part of the equation, like the driveway was the destination, the house just scenery, and something in the logic of their night said, stop here, idle here, sit here, lean out here, look under the car for the thing you left here, or the thing you imagined you did. I know how that sounds. I also know the shape of a feeling when it lands and refuses to be moved by reason. If you ask me now what I'm afraid of, I'll tell you it's not strangers knocking or someone testing the back gate. It's the car that doesn't leave when every story you have says it should. It's the driver who opens the door without needing the night to see them do it. It's the way an engine can feel like a thought running in a room you don't have a key for. I sleep mostly. The cameras blink their little green comfort. The porch light times itself on at dusk. The dowel we added to the slider sits snug in its track. My friends tease me for being a homeowner in a rental. I take the joke. It's better than explaining the other thing. Sometimes though, some late empty hour when the heater clicks off and the house edits out its own noise, I'll be mid-step in the hallway and the ceiling will wash white in a slow sweep. Headlights, somewhere, maybe at the corner, maybe a neighbor taking a turn wide, maybe a rideshare waiting for the house across the street. I stand still and wait for the engine to tell me which story it belongs to, and I listen harder than I mean to for whether it leaves. Dark hallway ceiling washed in a faint sweep of passing headlights through the blinds, atmosphere uncertain, ordinary suburban night carrying unresolved dread. That's how it always starts for me, not with a bang, but with a trick of light that reminds you the world exists outside your walls. A car slides by at the corner, a pair of beams combs the inside of your house like a slow scan. And for a second, you see your own ceiling as if it belongs to someone else. I was halfway between sleep and whatever comes after doom scrolling when I saw it. I'd propped my bedroom door open for airflow, and from my bed I could see the top third of the hallway and a slice of the ceiling above it. The sweep slid and faded. The house went quiet again. The tiny hum of the charger in the outlet sounded too loud. Somewhere down the street a dog complained twice and gave up. I rent a small 2-bedroom with a narrow hall. The second bedroom is a storage room that I keep locked. It's not mysterious, it's just mine. Boxes, a folded futon, a tool bag I pretend I know how to use. The door has an old brass knob that sticks unless you lift as you turn. When I moved in, the landlord gave me 2 keys. The spares hang on a nail in the kitchen. My key lives on my chain with the front door and mailbox keys. I lock it out of habit, the way you lock things when you live alone. Less about security, more about keeping your own boundaries honest. That night, the air had that barely spring coolness that makes the heater kick on once at midnight and then forget its job. I tucked the blanket around my ankles and told myself I'd put the phone face down. I didn't. I watched an email come in and set it down like I was the one doing the house a favor. The sound was small enough to doubt. A soft metal movement from the hallway. Not a bang, not a footstep. A click with weight behind it, like the latch of an interior door. I held still, then sat up. My brain did the thing it always does, rolled out the ordinary explanations first. Pipes, settling, wind. But the windows were closed. The night wasn't windy, and pipes don't sound like the tongue of a latch sliding out of a strike plate. I told myself I'd imagined it because I knew the door was locked. It's always locked at night. I even pictured it, right where it is, third door on the left, white paint a little chipped around the knob, a small brass keyhole cover that flips up with a fingernail. I got up anyway. The hallway carpet is the kind landlords pick because it hides sins. Low pile, medium gray, textured enough that your feet feel it. I placed each step in the exact middle of the runner to avoid the edge creaks. It's muscle memory now. When you live by yourself, you learn the quiet paths of your life like roots through a city. The storage door stood closed in its frame. I looked at it the way you look at a person who's pretending to be asleep. Nothing moved. The house breathed the way houses do, tiny thermal groans you can only hear when you're listening too hard. I leaned in and pressed my fingertips to the knob. Cold, then warmer, where my skin met metal. I felt the tiniest wiggle. Locked. I flipped the little keyhole cover up with my nail and saw the slit of brass. Present. Unremarkable. Almost enough to laugh at myself. I went back to bed, sensible in that way people are when they've heard something they can't file correctly. I turned the phone face down for real this time. I watched the soft sky of the ceiling and tried to let my breath find a rhythm that wasn't a held note. The second sound was impossible to dismiss. Distinct, the kind of sound you recognize because you've made it 1,000 times yourself. Unlatching. Not a click this time, the full action. A tiny scrape as the latch withdrew, a shallow pop, a sigh of wood on paint as pressure released. I sat up so fast the blanket made a sound like a sail snapping. The hallway was a rectangle of dark. I didn't turn on a light. I don't know why. Maybe turning the light on felt like announcing my position. Maybe some primitive part of me hates seeing empty space brightly lit. I stood at my doorway and held my breath until spots flickered at the edges of my vision. Then I exhaled and stepped into the hall. The storage door was slightly open. Not wide, an inch, maybe 2, enough to see a sliver of darker dark between jamb and door, enough to know I hadn't imagined anything. The part of your brain that's in charge of tidy ideas will rush to help you right now. You forgot to lock it. You think you locked it, but you didn't. You didn't pull it tight. The latch didn't seat. Humidity swelled the door, and it released. Drafts. Except the air was still. Except I'd checked it before bed. I check it without thinking, the way you check the stove after you leave the kitchen, the way you pat your pockets for your wallet and keys. Hand on knob. Lift, turn, click, tug. Habit turned superstition turned defense. I reached for the knob. My hand stopped halfway. It felt rude suddenly to touch it. I pressed the door edge instead, far from the knob, and it moved without resistance. I opened it just enough to slip my face into the gap. The room breathed the smell of closed spaces. Dust, cardboard, a hint of dry wood, the faint sour of old laundry somewhere in a sealed bin. I found the switch with my fingertips and flipped it. Light pooled around boxes and the shadow of the futon frame, a leaning stack of paperbacks, the blinking red of a power strip even though nothing was plugged in, a poster rolled in a rubber band I'd meant to hang and never did. Familiar junk, same as yesterday, same as a week ago. I stared until the shapes in the room settled back into the meaning they always had. Then I turned the light off and pulled the door gently shut until the latch met the strike with a careful click. I lifted up on the knob when I turned it the way you have to and felt it catch. I tugged once. Locked. One more second of stillness. Then back to bed. I didn't sleep well. My body performed the shape of rest while my mind stayed in the hallway. In the morning, the door was shut and locked. Sun came through the blinds and laid its grid across the carpet like a net. My key still weighed down my pocket. I stood with coffee and didn't open the door. There was nothing to see, and I wanted my daytime brain to win. It did, until night. The next night I went to bed earlier than I meant to, the way you do when you don't want to think and your body chooses the off switch. The same sweep of headlights visited the ceiling and left. A neighbor's sprinkler thunked awake and ticked in semicircles against the fence. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and told myself I'd done enough for myself for one day. Sometime after midnight, the house let me hear it again, unlatch. I had been hovering half above sleep, and the sound pulled me into the hallway before my brain had a plan. I was there in 3 steps, aware of my own pulse in my teeth. The door was open wider this time, 3 inches, enough to fit my hand, enough to make the room beyond look like a mouth. I did a deeply practical thing. I went to the kitchen, slid the spare key off the nail and brought it back. I wanted to make sure I wasn't about to talk myself into something about lost keys or misremembered locks. Both keys matched. I used mine. The lock turned smoothly. I pulled the door closed, lifted, clicked it home. I tested it like a cop in a show. Tug, tug. It held. I stood there long enough to feel foolish and then longer, waiting to feel anything else. I left the spare key on the hall table instead of the kitchen nail. I don't know if that means anything. It felt like keeping the conversation close. The third night gave me something I couldn't paper over. It rained. Not hard. Just that soft, steady rain that makes roofs murmur and cars hiss. The air felt clean. The kind of night where you'd think everything would sleep harder. I woke to the sound of the door opening. Not just the latch this time. Hinges texted me their complaints in tiny vowels. I was on my feet and in the hall before the two notes finished singing. The door stood open a foot. The room beyond was a dark rectangle smelling of cardboard and old air and something else. My imagination, probably, but I thought of attics and the dry taste of insulation. I found the switch and flipped it, and the light gave me back the same small life in boxes. The futon frame, the poster, the power strip blinking its red dot like a polite warning. But a box that had sat against the far wall was a little crooked, and the folded throw blanket on top of it, one I'd hastily set there months ago, hung a few inches over the edge it hadn't hung over yesterday. That's the kind of detail your brain will try to bargain with. You moved it, you brushed it earlier, you're inventing inches because inches are better than thoughts. I didn't touch anything. I stood in the doorway and let the bright hum of the lone bulb be the only proof that time exists. Then I turned it off and pulled the door back toward the jamb. The latch kissed the strike and stopped. It didn't seat. I lifted and turned and wiggled and felt the alignment the way your tongue finds a chipped tooth. It needed the old lift and turn trick, and I did it, and it clicked. And I put my hand flat on the panel and pushed harder than necessary to make sure we both knew who lived here. I went back to bed and didn't sleep. Morning made a new choice for me. Call the landlord. I described a binding latch and old hinges and asked if someone could take a look. He said sure, he'd swing by on Saturday. He said doors shift in spring. He said houses breathe. He said the right things in the voice of someone who buys paint by the gallon and never seems to run out of it. The days packed themselves full of errands and email and the blank white of word processors that want work. I came home each night and found the door as I left it, locked, not a millimeter off. Daylight made me smug. Night took it back. On Friday, the rain returned. Not a storm, just a steady announcement. I made pasta and told myself I'd learn the lift and turn well enough to teach a class on it. At 11, I brushed my teeth with the bathroom door open, like I always do. The mirror showed me the line of the hall and the closed storage door in the background, an ordinary geometry I'd never noticed until it mattered. As I spit and rinsed, the door behind me unlatched in the mirror. I didn't move at first. The image arrived without my body ready for it. The tiny pop, the sigh of paint, the sliver of shadow. Everything happened behind me and in front of me at once. I turned around and saw the real version half a second behind the mirror version, like the house wanted to show me the sequence from two angles so I wouldn't insult it by calling this my imagination. I walked into the hall, slow. The door was open 2 inches. I pressed it shut. I locked it. I placed my palm flat and felt the dull thud of a solid door meeting a solid frame and told myself that whatever else was happening, at least physics, was still physics. At 2:07, I woke to a draft on my feet. The window in my bedroom has a cheap seal, and the wind threads through sometimes like a thought you can't kill, but the air now felt like it came from the hallway. Colder. It moved hair on my ankle. I sat up. The house was a diagram of dark lines. I saw the storage door first, because my body already knew to find it, open wider than I had left it, a wedge of shadow deep enough to step into. I got up with the intention of closing it and felt something else first, the very faint sound of movement from inside the room. Not heavy, not a step. Something soft being dragged, fabric on cardboard, the whisper of a sleeve across a box. I spoke out loud without meaning to. Hello? It was not brave. It was a sound like tossing a stone in a well and waiting for the echo to tell you how deep it is. There was no answer. The dragging stopped. The house held its breath. I flipped the hall light on. The room threw its shadows onto itself and made a stage of my mess. The throw blanket lay on the floor now, a soft spill that hadn't been there. One small box had rotated, just a quarter turn, but it put its label into view in a way it hadn't been. Kitchen, mugs in my marker handwriting. The power strip LED pulsed like a heartbeat found a job. I took 2 steps into the room and then stopped as if there were tape on the carpet telling me where audience ends and set begins. I didn't pick anything up. I didn't touch a thing. It felt rude suddenly to fix what was wrong. I backed out, shut the light, and closed the door. Lift, turn, click. I added the chain I'd installed stupidly on an interior door when I moved in, purely for the symbolism of it, and I felt better for exactly 3 seconds. At 2:31, the chain rattled. Not a violent shake. Not horror movie theater. Just the light, testing noise a chain makes when a door moves against it from the other side and finds it functional. I called 911. Saying it out loud made me feel like I was asking permission to be scared. The dispatcher asked the right questions, and I tried to give the right answers. "Someone might be in a room in my house," I said, and my voice sounded like I'd borrowed it from a quieter person. "Stay on the line," she said. "Are you able to leave safely?" I looked at the hall and at the dark line of the front door and thought about crossing that open space. I can if I have to. If you can leave without passing the room, do so. If you can't, stay where you are and don't engage. Officers are on the way. I went to the front door barefoot and felt every staple under the carpet like a decision. I opened it quietly, stepped into the night, and closed it behind me. The porch smelled like wet dust. Rain whispered on the sidewalk. I stood on the top step with the phone pressed to my ear and watched my own living room window from the outside, the way you watch a TV you have a stake in. The cruiser turned onto my block faster than light ever does when you want it. The dispatcher told me when they were 3 houses away and asked me to put the phone down only when I was with them. I did. The world snapped back into the scale of people talking and shoes on concrete and radio mumbles. They went in first. They asked me where the room was. I told them. They unsnapped nothing because this is my neighborhood, but they moved with the care of people who understand doors and what might be behind them. The chain was still on. The lock was still turned. A quiet test of knob and wood. "Sir, do you have a key?" I did. I handed it over and stepped back. They opened the door with the chain engaged, peered into the gap with a flashlight, and announced themselves in a low voice. They paused like the air might answer if given a fair chance. It didn't. One officer unclipped the chain, the other held the door and set a foot against the bottom to take the pressure if there was any. There wasn't. The door swung open to the same mess I'd made and the new geometry of a rotated box and a fallen blanket. They swept the room top to bottom. No one in the closet, no one under the futon, window latched, no crawl space access, no hole, no hidden door to make sense of a story that had never asked for your sense in the first place. They asked me if anything seemed different. I told them the blanket and the box and the feeling. They were kind about the feeling. They are trained to let you have whatever you have while staying inside their own rules. "Could anyone else have a key?" one asked. "No," I said, and thought of the spare on the nail. It was on the hall table now, where I'd left it. "Unless someone broke in earlier," I said, and hated that my voice made it sound like a guess when it wasn't. We walked the perimeter of the house in the rain. The fence was wet and unhelpful. The gate latch had water in it and stuck even worse than usual. The windows were closed against weather and reason. No pry marks. No prints we could see in the smeared sheen of water. "Sometimes doors shift," one officer said. "Spring can do that." "I know," I said. I called my landlord. They told me to keep the chain, to use the lock, to call if anything else happened. They told me to sleep if I could, and I said I would, and we both pretended that was a thing a person can decide. After they left, the house felt like it had been picked up and set back down an inch to the left. I left the hall light on like a nightlight for the adult I was pretending to be. I didn't close my bedroom door. I didn't open the storage door. I lay on my bed and watched the strip of ceiling and waited for headlights to announce that the world still had cars and other people and rules. Morning came. The landlord came Saturday with a multi-tool and 2 kinds of brusque confidence. He planed the strike a millimeter, tightened the hinge screws, replaced the latch with a new one that had a sharper tongue. He worked fast and whistled tunelessly and said the phrase, "That should do it," like he was laying a spell on wood. He was halfway out the door when he hesitated. "You said it opened by itself?" "Yeah." He nodded, like a man who respects wood and also respects ghosts, but only a little. "It'll hold now," he said. "If it doesn't, it's not the door." I laughed because he laughed, and we shook hands like the transaction we'd just made had bought me something more than shaped metal. Saturday night, the door held. Sunday night, it held until 3:12 a.m., when I woke to the sound of the chain sliding across its bracket. I thought I'd dreamt it. The kind of dream that steals a sound from your house and puts it in your head. I lay there on my back and heard my own breath and the tiny tick of the hall light, and then, impossibly, the softest brush of a panel settling against a jamb. I got up and walked to the hall because that is what I do now when the house asks. The door was closed, the chain was off, the lock was turned. I turned the light on and opened the door, and the room was the room. The blanket was back on the box, folded badly, but not by me. The power strip's red light was off even though the switch was on. A mug from the kitchen, Mug's box, sat on the floor 2 feet from where the box was. A plain thing with a chipped rim, nothing special, something I hadn't held since the morning I'd packed it. I stared at it until the ordinary weight of it returned. Then I picked it up and set it back in the box and closed the flap. I locked the door again. Lift, turn, click, chain. I tugged and it held, and I stood there long enough to feel silly, and then long enough to feel like the kind of person who forgets the stove is already off. In the morning, I moved the spare key back to the kitchen nail. I bought a small wedge doorstop and pressed it under the storage room door from the hallway side, an absurd little triangle of rubber that felt like a prayer. I installed a cheap battery door alarm that chimes when the door opens. It chirped cheerfully when I tested it and then stayed quiet all day like any good promise. The door hasn't opened since, or maybe it has and learned my new rules. Maybe I got better at the lift and turn than I know. Maybe the wedge matters. Maybe spring passed and wood forgave me. Maybe the house likes the cup back where it lives. I don't know. What I do know is that some nights, when the ceiling washes white with a slow stripe of passing headlights and the suburban quiet puts its careful weight on the house, I listen for the tiny grammar of latches and wood. And I feel, in my fingers, where metal warms under skin, the memory of the turn and lift like a phrase I learned in another language and can't forget. If you asked me now why I keep the door locked, I'd tell you it's because I keep things in there. Boxes, a futon, tools. That's true. It's also because the lock is a sentence I can finish. In a house where a door can open by itself and fold a blanket badly and set a mug down on the floor like it wanted me to see it, the click I make with my own hand is the only punctuation I get. The rest is draft, headlights, rain, a chain that rattled once and then remembered its job, a wedge, a nail, a key on a ring I touch 3 times before I go to bed. And a dark hallway, waiting, carrying only as much dread as I bring to it, and then a little more.